Bob here from Hot Track RC. Today we're working on the Team Associated RC10 team car. We're going all in on this buggy to set it up for carpet racing. We got a lot of parts to install and we might even get it over to the track, so stick around. Let's take a look at some of the parts we're going to install on this buggy. The wheel choice I'm making is going to dictate some changes that we need to make. I use this RC10 J Concepts mono wheel, and these are designed for the 3/16 inch axles, not the stepped 1/4 inch that come with these Riri kits. So that means we got to change out rear axles. Why am I doing this? Well, I got on this standard when the 2013 Worlds car came out. It came with 3/16 rear axles, which was a change from the original. That was an upgrade because at the time, that's what all the wheels had changed to. And now with all the Riris, we've gone back to the vintage stepped axles. So I'm stuck with all these J Concepts wheels, but they are really good wheels, 2.2 inch. So we're going to make the conversion on this car to a 3/16 inch wheel. These are the front monos, and they are the wides. Just be aware of that if you get these. Now, you can cut these to be able to accept the narrow tires. And I cut it with a Dremel cutoff wheel right at the inner step there that would normally hold the inside of the bead. I use that to hold the outside of the bead. So, to do this, we're going to go with some Fan RC CVD joints with the 3/16 inch straight axle. Okay, but that's not all you need. You need a few things. Good idea to switch over to the more modern world style hub carriers. And I could go Fan RC on these, but I kind of like sticking with associated parts. We're going to need shims. We need 3/16 inch shims to get our spacing right on everything. You need crush tubes or these spacers. Now, you can buy these from Fan RC in a kit that comes with several of these parts. I didn't buy these as a kit. I got them separately on eBay. But these are very important. They go between the bearings inside the hub carrier. You need those. And then with the Fan RC, you're going to get some fancy aluminum blue anodized washers that go behind the wheel. You do need something, but I'm just going to use a regular washer. I've done this on my other RC10 Gold Pan. It works fine. I'll show you how to do that. But you can save yourself some time and just buy the Fan RC kit. And then we're going to go with this battery hold down strap. But you got to take these on and off. And with the square lipo packs that I'm going to run, you can't really squeeze this battery box in. So we're also going to upgrade to these J Concepts thumb screws. These will replace the current screws here and allow us to tighten this strap down so that it doesn't flop around, but it's still easy to get on and off. And since you're threading these off this stud that mounts permanently in the battery box, you don't have to worry about stripping out the thread in this nylon battery box from taking the battery in and out over and over again. Now, some other things we need to do on the rear end of the car. We need to fix the in-play in the transmission differential. And I'll show you what that's about. Several viewers have pointed this out, that this team car has play in the transmission. So we got to fix that. So we've got some shims here. I'll show you about that. Those are going to allow us to take that in-play out. We're going to replace the original transmission screws with some aluminum screws. That was an upgrade that was made on the Worlds car. I found the nylon nuts for the bell cranks, thanks to some comments from some of our viewers. Those come from Ace Hardware of all places, and they look very similar to the original. I like the originality. We are making some changes to this car for practicality to actually be able to run it on the carpet track. But that's cool. I like to use original where I can. These are aluminum lock nuts. That was an upgrade on the World's car. On the rear axles, we'll use those instead of the steel lock nuts. Then we got to get into tuning the car, and we've got a selection of springs that we're going to choose from here, mainly black and green. The black is softer than the green, but the green is softer than the original or stock silver springs that come with the kit. I have the same for the fronts. I also have browns, which are even softer than the blacks. Probably won't use those, but we'll see. We've also got some nose weights to get the front of the car a little more balanced, get some more bite on the tires. I won't install these immediately. I'll probably run it a little bit and then see how those help or don't help. And then for electronics, I did an episode on tuning this Le Mans Kyosho Gold motor. So check that out if you haven't seen it. We set the timing, we shimmed the in-play out of the motor rotor shaft. We're going to go with an XR10 stock spec ESC and then a ProTech 160. This, I think, is a pretty nice servo, and that should get us some really crisp, responsive steering. So, let's get at it. These re-release stealth transmissions all seem to have in-play in the outdrives, as you can see right here. So, time to tear down the transmission. Seems like I just put this together, but I didn't notice that play, so here we go. These come apart fairly easily, but there are quite a few screws, and you have to pull the slipper clutch assembly off so that you can separate the motor plate from the transmission housings. I'm using a couple hex wrenches here to keep the outdrives from spinning as I loosen that nut. And now we can separate the cases. The hardest part about this operation is getting these bearings back out. I'm using a pick to get inside and only push on the outer race of the bearings so I don't damage the shield. Now we're going to place an unknown number of these shims in this bore and then install the bearing on top to push those inward and control the outdrives. But why do I say unknown number? Well, I didn't measure the amount of in-play like I should have, and these are 0.003 of an inch shims. So how many do we need? Checking to orient the diff correctly here, and then we'll put the housings together and find out that we still have plenty of play. Now, it turns out overall that there was about 0.040 of an inch end play in the outdrives, and these are 0.003 of an inch shims. I want to put the same number of shims in both sides. So now I'm finally measuring it, and I have some shims in here, and now this is about 30 thousandths. So what's going to happen is ultimately I'm going to end up with about 6 shims on each side. Why so many? Well, yes, I could have gotten thicker shims, but then you also need thinner shims to do the fine adjust. Because if you only have 10 thousandths thick shims, when you get to the end, you're having to put a 10 thousandths inch shim in both sides of the case. You know, that's 20 thousandths one way or the other, so you really can't adjust the end play properly. So if you want to get thicker, then you're going to have to get multiple shim thicknesses. Now that's actually a little bit too tight. So what did I end up with? I ended up with about 6. 6 times 3 is 18, times 2 is 36 thousandths. And so if you have 40 thousandths in play, that would be just about right to leave a little bit of clearance. Once we tighten down the housing screws, it will collapse a little bit more and get tighter. Now we're going to switch to these aluminum screws that I got off McMaster car because the World's car used those, and I think that's a super cool upgrade. So now I can feel there's a little bit less in play, but it's looking good. So we'll just snug everything up, and we'll be off to the races. I don't love the universal transmission brace that the kit comes with. That was something that was used on these transitional cars, but I want to go with the carbon fiber stealth-only transmission brace. So I'm switching the post over to that. Now, I'm going to see here, though, that the holes that came in this transmission brace are too tight. The screw is very snug, and with the screws being that tight, they don't line up perfectly with the bulkhead, so I went ahead and drilled those out, and that fixed that problem. But then we're going to see that the rear holes in the transmission brace don't line up perfectly with the transmission mounting points. And that's because there's just a lot of variation in these stamped chassis. And it's talked about in some of the old manuals that you may need to shim between the motor plate and the chassis to prevent bending and warping it and causing problems with the anti-squat. So there's the World's Car Manual, the original 93. So we're going to put some washers in here to space this out and let this chassis sit more where it wants to. So it's a little bit of a hassle, but just take your time and work those washers in there and then get the screws through. So now this will allow things to tighten up and not deflect as much. Does it completely solve the problem? No, but it's better. To be honest, I think putting washers in there looks a little bit hokey, but the fact that it's in the original World's Car Manual makes it super cool to me. So I completely overlook the fact that it looks a little bit like an afterthought. But these are the types of adjustments that were made by the racers at the time to improve the car. So I love that heritage. Now don't forget to tighten up your pan screws. Now we're going to move on to the shock towers. The team car had 2 more holes inboard. In my mind, that's pretty important for this car. It's one of the advancements that was made around this time, and the Viper body is designed so that the shocks sit inside, which requires those inner mounting points to be used. Here's the 2014 World's Car, and you can see the inner mounting points being used there. We're going to use the shock tower off this car as a template, and it fits very well right up against the team car tower, which is the same as all the gold pan towers that they've been issuing so far with these re-release kits. And now we're going to drill those holes. Now notice the World's Car has 4 holes, but the team car only had 2. And the holes came out perfectly, so we're ready to take this fixture back apart, and then we'll be able to mount things up. Now, the holes on the newer shock towers were a loose fit, whereas the originals had a tight fit where you had to thread the screw all the way through the hole. But I think for adjustability, they started making those holes a little bit bigger. That's the way I've drilled this new inner hole. And so these are easy to put together, but you have to Loctite that nut and make sure that you snug it up. And that looks awesome. So the kits recently haven't been coming with a lot of 5/16 inch long screws, so I bought myself a supply of them. And the lower holes here should be 5/16 to avoid having them poke through the back of the bulkhead. But the tops are 3/8, a little longer because the bulkhead's thicker there. So not a big deal. All right, now we can put the shocks back on. This doesn't change the droop because it's kind of on the same arc. So we don't really have to do any setup changes here. And there we go. That looks awesome. I like the angle of the shocks. Now you can see that the screws are not protruding through the bulkhead. Time to switch to 3/16 inch axles. We're going with these Fan RC CVA joints. These come assembled, but they're not lubricated. So you have to take these back apart, which is kind of odd, but it works. So we're going to use the black grease. And they are 1.5 millimeter longer than the stock, so they should help with the engagement into the outdrives. So first we pop this retaining ring off, we push the pin out, and we can pull the dog bone out, and now we need to get this lubed up. So mainly inside the bore where that barrel rides that the pin goes through, that needs to be nice and lubricated. It's going to be oscillating back and forth quite rapidly. So this is a messy job, but got to be done. The outside here, I don't think that really does much. There's not much that touches there. Anyway, put the pin through, and now we've got a nice lubricated assembly. Put our retaining ring back on. Now, I've seen where it's suggested that you super glue the ends of that retaining ring. I didn't do that there. We're going to remove the old hub carrier assembly as a unit, which is quite easy to do. One E-clip, pull it out, pop the ball cup off, and then we're going to tuck those away. So if we want to go back to the original U-joints with the stepped axles, we can. For the new hub carriers, we need 3/16 by 3/8 inch bearings. We'll pop those into the new hub carriers, and then we need these crush tubes. It's very important. That keeps the bearings from getting crushed. So stick that in between. Next, we'll install our ball stud. These hub carriers are symmetrical, so the only thing that makes a left hand versus a right hand assembly is which side that ball stud is on. So make one of each. Put a little Loctite on that nut. And now we can put our axle through with shims. So the World's Car Manual from 2014 shows 3 shims. So we'll start with that. And we need 1 shim on the outside for the setup I'm going to show you, because we're going to use a washer instead of the conical backing plate. And we need to shim that washer so it does not rub on the outer race of the bearing. Now we got to push this pesky pin through. Channel lock pliers are the easiest way I've found. Okay, there's too much play in there, so we need to add another shim. And I'm going to put that on the inside because engagement's been an issue recently, so adding a shim on the inside will push the dog bone into the outdrive more. Of course, these are longer on the Fan RC CVAs, so maybe it won't be a problem. And now we've got better clearances. So we'll go ahead and push this pin all the way through, center it on there, and now we've got what we need. Now, I like having that backing plate there. I know some people have run kind of just with a shim there or something, but I think you need something to spread the load out on the back of the wheel. Now, look at our engagement here. When the suspension is compressed, the dog bone is coming almost all the way up to the inside of the outdrive, and then it is safely inside when it's extended. So I think that is near optimal. So just pop your E-clip on and check that out. That looks good. I'm excited. All right, now there is a little bit of end play in our arms between the arm mounts. So I'm going to use some of these 1/8 inch shims. This is absolutely not required, but you know, I'm going all in. So the easiest way to do this is to put the shim onto the hinge pin. If you try to just center it in between the parts and push the hinge pin through, it is very difficult. Now, the shim might get stuck in the little ring groove there. You just kind of play with it and get it to push through. Now, 1/8,000th thick shim is still a little bit loose, so I'm going 2. So, 16 thousandths of play there. That's a fairly significant amount, so I think it's worth maybe putting these in. And this time it's going to fit well, and I like that. But just make sure you don't get it tight. If it gets tight when you put an extra in, then you got to go back and take one out. Okay? Now, I didn't get my dog bone in, but I'll fix that in a minute after I get the E-clip popped back through. And I'll just have to take my ball cup off and reinstall. Up front, we're going to switch out the bell crank nuts to nylon that matches the original in the Team Car Manual. If this isn't for you, that's fine, but I just think it's super cool to match the originality. And since it doesn't come with the kit, tracking these down and now finally being able to install them is a little bit of an accomplishment, so I like the way that looks. Reminds me of my original gold pan. Moving on, we're going to install the Le Mans Gold motor. I did some tuning on this in a previous episode called Dialing in the Performance of Your Motor, so if you're interested, check that out. I use a motor analyzer to dial in the timing, and I'm going to go with a 24-tooth aluminum pinion to get started because I have that. And then we can go from there. I don't think we're going to need to go any lower than this. We'll probably need to go to more teeth. And now we need to get the mesh right. So we just want that little bit of rock there. Now, sometimes these spur gears wobble just a tiny bit. So as you turn the gears, you might notice that the mesh changes. And you want to set that so that it never gets tight, that it never gets to the point where there's no clearances. So you gotta kind of move it around, but that looks good. Now, because of the way this slipper clutch works, the pinion sits out a little further than I'm used to. So I think it's okay, and we'll install the dust cover here, and no issue there. I will notice later that the ball cup is kind of close. Motor looks great, gold on gold. I like it. All right, now let's install the battery strap. We're going to remove the factory screws, and we're going to put this Fan RC Worlds strap on here. Inexplicably, it's short. It is not the same as the original World's Car strap that goes all the way back to the bulkhead. If anybody knows why Fan RC made those shorter, drop me a comment below. I'm using these J Concepts thumb screws because it's going to allow us to tighten that strap up so it doesn't flop around and make it easy to take these on and off without having a screw go in and out of the plastic cup over and over again. So these are super easy to install. You know, it's a simple product, but it's really elegant. I like them a lot, and they thread on super positively. So that looks good. Now the strap is nice and stiff. I'm going to use a shorty lipo, so I need that, and it looks good. Okay, the originality, it's different, right? But I got to work with the practicality factor as well, where it's needed. Time to install the servo. And I think this is a pretty good looking unit. And so let's install the servo mounts. I'm going stock nylon mounts, but I'm going to use the grommets that come with this servo, which fit really well into those pockets. So that all mounts up really tight. And then I've got this servo horn that was sitting around. This is too long. I'm going to switch this out at some point. I end up cutting it shorter in this episode, but I don't like having that modified, so I'll probably replace it. But you need a plastic servo horn to go with these wire linkages, and you'll see why in a minute. Anyway, we need to use the inner holes. Unfortunately, I'd like to use the ones closer to the back of the pan because it would center the servo horn more on the bell cranks, but it's too narrow. And so that's why these wire linkages are handy, because you can bend around the servo. Here's my original gold pan from 1984. That's the linkage that I bent up way back then. And look how huge that servo is. And this is really the only way to do it. There's no way that you could get a straight linkage. Here's the 2013 Classic reissue. A little bit better bend geometry there. Same setup though. And then if we look at the World's Car, they went to a better bell crank that has a higher mounting point. So now you can get the linkage to go above the servo and everything clears. This gold pan uses the J Concepts aftermarket bell cranks. They're basically World's Car bell cranks made out of aluminum. They're really nice. Notice that the ball cup is mounted on the back side of the servo arm, which in this case is also a servo saver. I've flipped the mounting blocks for the servo around on one side, and I've used a combination of holes here to get the servo back farther, but that creates a conflict between the lower mounting holes and the pan screws, so I can only use the upper holes. So this is a little funky, but I did manage to get alignment really good. Now, you need a countersink, ideally, or a drill to kind of take some of the edge off the servo horn so that the wire will go through. Make sure that the hole is the right size, and do that also on the bell crank hole. Probably use the center hole. I'm using the inside, but that gives you a lot of mechanical advantage and makes your steering a little too fast. You can get the bend correct to do the center hole, which is what's shown in the manual. But by putting that countersink in there, you'll be able to get the wire to pop through. It will. And then it'll be very snug, but not tight. And then we need to put our set screws here in the collars that are going to clamp our wires together. So don't lose those guys. They're pretty small. And now we're going to get this servo in, put the little washer here on the back to compensate for the step between the nose plate and the chassis, and screw everything down. The trick to these wire linkages is to get the bends correct in the right locations, the right angle. It's not totally obvious how it should be done. I did cut them a little shorter. You'll notice if you compare to yours. Don't cut them too short, but I think there's a little too much material. Now, obviously, this servo horn linkage needs to bend toward the center of the pan. So I'll do that. And now you can see that that is going to align with the linkage coming off the bell crank better. Now, I trimmed that servo horn down a little bit, like I said, because it was too tall. So now, what about the front wire? Well, we need to angle that up because the bell crank mounting location is really low. So this won't bend up by itself. It's not a ball cup. It goes into the hole and kind of locks in position. So you got to bend it upward like that. And now I'm going to do a compound bend because I also want it to come around and match up at the right angle with the other wire. So now I'm going to bend this sideways about where the up bend starts. And if I did that right, it's going to line up perfectly. Yeah, I know it's a little fiddly, but if you get it right, you'll see that boom, right there. Look at that. That is dead on. And now we can drop our collars in. And, should those be right next to each other or spaced out? I think, if you've got the clearance or the length on the wire, you can space them out a little bit like this. But they're pretty forgiving wherever you want to put them. And now we can adjust our position. It's quite easy to adjust. And check our travel. I should be doing this with the nut on there. For some reason, I took that bell crank nut off. And sometimes the wire will hit that. So check that out. But looks good. And it's getting full range of motion here, which is what I want. You can slide the wires when you loosen the collars a little bit anywhere you want and get all the alignment right. But what's interesting here, I know this is a very antiquated solution, but compared to ball cups, there is less play in these wires than with ball cups. I kid you not. The ball cups would have a little bit of clearance on the ball studs. These linkages have almost no clearance. All right, on to the bumper. And I like to use this style. It's just something somebody's making. And it's very simple, but it does the job, and it's protected my nose pieces on other cars. I think it looks decent. You can still see the AE logo there, which I like. Next, we'll switch over the wheels and tires for carpet track. I had these already built up. They've been run very lightly. So we're going to pop this on. And then I notice there's something wrong here, and it's because I stole the bearings out of the inside of these front wheels. Luckily, I have 2 more bearings out of my Fast Eddie kit, and I'm going to pop those 3/16, 3/8 inch OD bearings in there, and now everything will be good. And the rears are pin drive. They're 3/16 axles that we installed, and those will go right on. And I'm going with aluminum lock nuts. And that was an upgrade on the World's car again. So I'm switching over from steel to aluminum. I think that looks super. Car's really looking good. That motor really pops. I like the battery strap. Now, what about ball cups? I got these RPM ball cups, but they are significantly larger than the originals. And that is the problem with them. Other than that, everything about them is better. They fit perfectly onto the turnbuckles. They pop onto the ball studs well and don't pop off as easily, but there are clearance problems with them. So as you'll see here on the inside, we're going to have interference between the bell crank location and the camber link. And that's already really close, but when I put both on here, this does not work. It hits. So I'm not going to be able to use those, sadly, on the inside. I'm going to end up only leaving them at the outside of the steering linkage. That's what usually pops off. So it is the most important location. Here we've got clearance issues with the dust cover, so only able to put 2 on. I could put a few more, but... Now, here's a kingpin. The kingpin in the original Edinger manual had some washers, plastic spacers that it used to take that play out. These are about 32 thousandths. These are very similar to the spacers that come for the inside of the shocks in this kit. The shocks are a little bit thicker and they didn't fit quite as well. You could sand them down if you have extras. All right, now looking at the front arms, I'm going to shim those again like we did the rear arms and take that little bit of play out. One minor complaint I have about this kit is that the front arm mounts are a little sloppy side to side. Next up, it's time to install the ESC. Again, I'm going with this Hobby Wing XR10 stock spec. These have worked really well for me. The first step is to mount the capacitor on the side so it's not flopping around, and then we can install it as a unit into the pan. And we want to make sure that we get our wire lengths correct, but I make a mistake here, which I should have known better, which is I have the motor set for a 24-tooth pinion, and I cut the wires to the length for that pinion. But as you rotate the motor back to accept more teeth on the pinion, you need more slack in the wire. So leave some extra. All right, now we do the battery side. Now I've got the battery in there, but I'm not going to solder or do anything with the battery sitting there. I have a wooden jig, which you may have seen in other videos, which I do on my soldering iron. It's really nice to hold the bullets in the right spot. Here I'm trimming the wires to the right length so that they can't be reversed on accident. And now I can solder here right on this wooden jig. I like the wood because it's a good insulator and I don't melt my plastic or anything. Now for the shark fin style receiver, I'm going to place that up in front of the RC10 Team Car logo. It has polarity markings on the side of it so that you can line up your connector properly. It's not always obvious which way it goes. Remember that your ESC plugs into channel 2, steering servo channel 1. All right, let's put the battery back in. And we'll install the strap. It's going to hold everything in place. Notice that I've cut a piece of foam out to prevent the battery from sliding back toward the bulkhead since it's a shorty lipo. Other than that, the shorties fit in these cups perfectly. And I'm quite happy with the wiring on this, except as I said, I cut those motor wires a little too short. I will have to slide that ESC backward a little bit, which will fix the problem. But other than that, looks great. All right, let's try firing it up. I already did my binding routine, so I'm just going to turn on the ESC, and I've got steering. And don't forget to adjust your endpoints. Steering feels crisp. Linkage is nice and tight. For ride height, I'm trying to get it down to 20. And this gauge, which is all I had at the time, only goes up to 20, so I'm higher than that. What do I do in the rear? Well, I can't go up any higher on the shock collars. The fronts are fitting as loosely as the spring can fit, so I'm going to go to green springs, which should be a little softer than stock, but actually that didn't help me. So I'm going to go to blacks, and now it's sitting a little bit lower, but it looks like I am going to install the nose weight after all and try to get this thing sitting down a little lower. I got two weights. I've got a 15 gram and a 30 gram, and I'm going to cut out some mylar so it doesn't scratch up the inside of my nose piece. And then I have to take a couple washers out for the thickness. I'm going to use the 30 gram and slide that into place and then just screw everything back together. And that looks pretty good. Now I am in range. And so I'm happy with that. Now in the rear, I'm going to try the green, but no, I'm still too high. So let me go to the blacks on the rear as well. So once we do that, we're going to find that it's still hard to get the rear of the car down as low as we'd like. Now there's some other tricks we could go to that I didn't pursue. You can shim underneath the arm mounts in the back, as someone commented in a previous video, but I am going to end up just trying to get this right around 20.
We'll get you prime painted and weighed. You're gonna be ready to go out on that racetrack. You're gonna be perfect.
At this point, I went out and got a height gauge with more range so I can actually measure what we're at, and we're just over 20. I like that stance. Arms are nice and level. And I love this body. No, I didn't paint it. I found this on eBay. Check it out. They come up from time to time. I love the way this one is airbrushed. The black into the pearl blue. And all the pinstriping, that is all paint. So couldn't be happier with this. This is the art that's shown on the front of the manual as opposed to the box itself, but the kit does come with a decal sheet for both options. They include the stripes, so if you don't want to paint them on, the decals offer that as well. Here we are, Nor-Cal Hobbies. Can't wait to get this bad boy on the track. And that looks good. And you're right, this is not the same body. This is my driver. All right, I like that action. Yeah, I couldn't bear to tear up that beautiful box art body on the track, so nice. A little double jump action there. And speed down the straightaway's okay. I think we can do better. Oh, watch the traction roll. I think I have a 24 tooth pinion on this buggy, and the ESC is running cool, motor's okay, so I'm gonna try going to a 26. This is a Plano case. I got this one set up just for vintage inch size fasteners and parts. I got my pinions and springs down here, so let's grab the next size up. This is a ProTech aluminum 26 tooth. Let's give that a try. This buggy definitely feels lighter than the RC10 four-wheel drive. Check out the track time episode for the four-wheel drive if you haven't seen that yet. I'm having a problem off that first double, landing nose high. Down the straight, maybe a little faster, but I think there's still room to improve there, so we may come back to the gearing. But I like how it's jumping over the tabletop. And this little jump, that little hop on the second jump, with lesser suspension would cause a problem, but this car's doing well over it. Still need to work on my rotation over that first. I need to get off the throttle a little sooner. I'm using brake, but that's not getting it down where I want. A little throttle right there, brought the front end up, and I think I can make it over that little short double there. Here I get off the throttle and perfect landing, but overcompensated on the second. And I want to squeeze a little more speed out of the straightaway, so take a look at that here in a moment. But one more time over the tabletop. Very nice and neutral there. Motor's still cool. Let's try a 28 tooth pinion. Gearing's starting to look pretty healthy on this. Let's see how it performs. In addition to motor temp, I'm looking to see how fast it wraps out to full speed on the straightaway. So let's throw it down. And this is just a warm-up. That's not full speed. So coming around the S here, and still jumps fine. And here we had plenty of punch to get over those short doubles. This car gives me the confidence to do that headed into a hairpin turn and look pretty good over those doubles, although I was a little too far to the left at the end. And there's the straightaway. That looked better. I like that. I bet you we can still squeeze a little more out. A little nose high on that landing, my fault. And we made that short double again. Liking that. And this landing was a little flatter and came out of the second in the right position to make the turn. Through the S's here. I could be pushing that a little harder. And nice flat landing. One last time down the straight. Looks good. Hit that cone a little bit. And throttle. Brings the nose right back up over the doubles. Here I'm too far to the right, off the line a little. But that was nice. 90 degrees. I think I'll bump the timing just a little bit more and see where that takes us. The problem with this motor is that we're off the scale. We're not technically supposed to go this high, but if it's not running too hot, let's see what happens. Okay, it's feeling pretty punchy. And I'm happy with the rhythm section there. Coming around the bend. Pretty good down the straight. It's taking a little longer to wrap out, so I think we're getting close. Driver air here, too much throttle. Getting a little warmer here, but still in the safe range. 123. I love this long tabletop jump. Something about adjusting the attitude of the car with the throttle and the brake in the air. Stay out of the flight path though when you're marshalling. It hurts when one of these cars hits you in the gut, especially when you're not expecting it. One more short double and then back to the ranch. One thing that I didn't fully address in this episode are the ball cups. The AE cups fit tight on the turnbuckles. They don't adjust well. They pop off when you don't want them to. So we tried the RPM cups, but they're too large to fit in all the locations. The solution is Fan RC ball cups. They look very similar, but they're much better than the AE cups. They fit better on the turnbuckles. They adjust nicely. They pop on and off well. So that's the solution, at least if you're staying with a similar style. If you're interested in that, I'll link to it in the description, along with most of the other parts that we tried out or put on the car in this episode. And AE is still putting these kits out fast and furious, so if you want to see what's up next, then we'll see you next time.